All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. While we're here to discuss digital public infrastructure, we also encourage you to quickly grab your physical infrastructure of coffee that's required to run through. So please run in and out. So I'm here today with sort of three folks that have really invested in digital public infrastructure. We've heard in the last session, on the payments digital infrastructure that was very sort of focused on. But I want to first go to Koshy. You worked on the oldest public infrastructure India has, which is Aadhaar. You were one of the advisors in those early days. So can you sort of explain to a fintech audience what digital public infrastructure is and why they should sort of care about it? Why is it relevant to their life?
Yeah, thanks. You're asking me to say the history. Okay, quickly, if you look at Mother Earth has 7 continents, and the last few years we have been developing the 8th one, the digital one. Some of the, and every country in the world was trying to take a place there. Many of them said, let me create huge private sector monolith, like the old East India Company. And so India said, we will have a different way. We will create a lot of, in the place that we want to acquire, we want to put the digital rails. On the top of which, let the innovation bloom. Let that not be restricted to, let there not be concentration. And that seems to be the big challenge globally. And every country, developed and the developing country, is struggling with concentration and its impact on the small business. And the control of the business owners is losing to the intermediaries. And so the digital public good is about giving the power back to the endpoints.
Lovely, lovely. So, Nikhil, do you want to tell us a little bit about the infrastructure that doesn't get talked about as much? Because we all have heard about the UPI story and, the payments journey. But India's digital public infrastructure or India's stack has a lot of other components that maybe aren't as leveraged by fintechs or, banks in the ecosystem. So can you kind of give us a picture of some of those and their applications?
Sure. I think we know, most of us know the basics of it, which is identity. We use Aadhaar and we have payments. UPI is the talk of the town, so everybody talks about it. But there are additional things that have also happened with them. And fortunately or unfortunately, they don't get the same stage time as the others. So one great example, for example, is eSign, which is actually built on top of Aadhaar, which enables any business or an individual to be able to digitally sign a document. Another great example is BBPs. Shinjini was mentioning just some time ago about how hard people find it to make their bill payments. I'm pretty sure if you all look back in your own lives, 10 years ago, you would probably stand in a line and you would probably be making a bill payment. Or all of us have this memory of as a kid going to the electricity company or the phone company and making the payment. And 10 years ago, payment gateways and online started, so we used to do that. Now you can sit at home, you can be sitting right now and be making a payment. So that's another example of another digital public infra. Another favorite of mine, which again is not spoken much in the fintech ecosystem, though it's pretty much fintech in some sense, is actually GSTN. In 2017, when the government actually brought out GST as a reform, it's actually backed by a solid technology platform called GSTN. And India is probably one of the only countries which has an open API infrastructure for GST or its tax payments. In the US, there's almost like $100 to $200 million that's actually spent every year lobbying against building APIs.
Wow.
And in India today, 75% of tax payments, tax filings that actually happen through APIs. People don't go to the GST portal to file their taxes. They use their own ERPs, whether it's an accounting software or a large company ERP. And that system talks through APIs to the GST backbone. And there are several examples of like these, right from Wi-Fi, healthcare, skills, education. If I get, I just want to give one more favorite example of mine on education. We all remember studying in schools, and we used to have textbooks either published by state government or CBSE, ICSE, whatever you're studying. And when you have lessons in your textbook, you used to have something like, factoids or something which is written in a box, and, it would give you some interesting tidbit about that lesson. Those factoids today are actually QR codes. This has been called as a way of solving, we all remember as kids we used to have doubts. We'll stand up and say, sir, I have a doubt, and so on, and the teacher tries to explain. Today, as we speak, most state governments in India, especially the progressive state governments, their textbooks carry QR codes, which are basically augmenting learning for children. So if you're, let's say, studying about, some chemical composition and you had a doubt about it, you can actually scan the QR code and it will open up videos, it will open up games, it will open up 3 or 4 other things that actually help you learn better.
Actually, this can also be used for like financial literacy, for example, as campaigns based on, the fintech
so
audience here.
So there's so much happening around us, just from a digital public infrastructure perspective. I just wanted to give a wide range all the way from financial services, healthcare, education, and so on and so forth.
No, it's super helpful.
Before I take your question, just to add to what I think Nikhil was saying and to relate to what Shinjini was saying also on BBPS and the benefit that, Dilip's not in the room, I think, the cross-border BBPS has brought about. So you just visualize it, you have, I come from a bank which has 55% non-resident kind of book. So you visualize a person in the UAE wanting to pay the electricity bill for his home where his aged parents are living somewhere in a village in Kerala. And he just walks into one of the exchange houses and does the cross-border bill payment for the electricity. So, that's completely converted the requirement of sending the cash here, that poor person having to figure out how to go and pay an electricity bill. So I just thought, take that use case. And I think Shinjini was mentioning that, and I think it's a great example of how the BBPS platform has gone beyond just domestic payments.
No, absolutely. And the sort of, even residents of the EU or the US don't actually have a single app where they can make most of their bill payments through. And today in India, we have like an ecosystem of apps that can offer that. And, the possibilities are sort of...
Yeah, and we just innovated on a different use case using BBPS, which was, there are these, a lot of people save for jewelry by paying every month some money. It's quite popular down south at least. So we put that now on BBPS for a couple of our clients, and therefore the monthly payment gets done through that. So, the use cases are huge.
Lovely. Yeah, it's a sort of very flexible standard that can be used for any sort of bill representation. That's lovely. But Shalini, out of the 330 banks in the country, Federal was one of the 8 that was present at the Account Aggregator launch and sort of was stated as one of the early adopters of Account Aggregator. And that's sort of the new sort of DPI kid on the block. So can you tell us a little bit about, in case you've been living under a rock, what Account Aggregator is, and also why as a bank, you're excited about it?
So first of all, I'm sure everybody in the room kind of understands and appreciates what an account aggregator is. But I think the best analogy I would give for it is to go back in time before banks like us knew what a credit score was and how to use a credit score. So, the credit information companies had their birth a few years back. And at that time, I think there was a lot of skepticism, etc., around, will this really work? Today, I think you can say it with utmost confidence that every bank uses a CIBIL Experian, and I think CIBIL's become literally like a verb. Have you found your CIBIL? Have you found your CIBIL kind of stuff? So if you rewind, if you take that forward now, and I think clearly there's where Account Aggregator comes in extensively. Account Aggregator is definitely the next UPI, the next whatever from the banking industry perspective, because it democratizes the availability of credit, as an example, democratizes the amount of information that is available for people to work on in a manner which is non-threatening for the customer, non-threatening because it is the aggregator in the middle is actually data blind. So gives you the confidence, that's the first thing that it does. Second, it's permissioned. You need to be, as a consumer, you need to be able to say, yes, I will use it, or I will allow it to be used for this particular purpose. I will not allow it to be used for some other purpose. Allow it to use only for a certain duration of time. So I think it's come up with a it ticks all the right boxes to be able to be used by the banking industry. And that's why we continue to be really very gung-ho about it. In terms of use cases, I think lending is obviously the most logical and the first use case that everybody has got onto and is using it in a form and fashion.
Can you tell us how Account Aggregator will actually help lending?
I think it's very clearly how, to some extent today what credit analysts do is they take statements from the customer and then you have somebody actually literally putting it into an Excel spreadsheet to decide what the cash flow is and kind of figuring out, okay, this is the amount of cash flow, this is what. Those are literally in the past now. All the information comes through APIs. You can ingest it into a bureau, you can ingest it into a decision rules engine, you can ingest it into anything else, and the output comes out. So lending decisions become that much easier, and the cost of underwriting comes down, as well as the accuracy of underwriting goes up. The other use case which we have worked with one of our fintech partners is on personal financial management. A lot of people used to do PFM in a very crude form, maybe reading SMSs, finding out something from statements. Those are days of the past. You get all the information, you can literally find out what the debits have been towards, what the credits have been towards, and do it. So enormous use cases on Account Aggregator that will be built. It's a journey. It started, and all of us are on this journey. I think the moment the entire banking industry gets along, the value of it will increase. But I think huge use cases, just like UPI has had use cases and BBPs has had use cases.
Lovely. So, Nikhil, I want to come back to you. As the sort of co-founder of a fintech, does digital public infrastructure make it easier or harder to work with banks? Because the core sort of question behind fintechs is what is going to be the nature of the relationship between banks and fintechs? And so what do you see is the role of DPI such as AA or other infrastructures in changing that relationship? Right?
Well, I'll answer it in a light-hearted manner, and then. So one is like, fortunately, banks, they're obviously not technologists, so therefore DPIs are all baked in with APIs, so they have to partner in some form or the other. Having said that, I met first Shalini probably 6-7 years ago, and the discussion that we were having was how should the bank create an API program? What does it mean? What does it take to do this? And so on. And it's very important. I would just want to illustrate this idea of why DPI works. My hypothesis is that the whole reason why DPI works because they're all built as APIs. So you can't, it's DPI, so what is DPI? It's not an object, it's not a thing. Finally, it's actually an API, right? The way a bank uses Aadhaar is through an API. The way a fintech uses UPI is through an API. The way e-signers is used through an API. Like I was talking about GST, it's used through an API. And APIs, for what it's worth, what is it doing? It's basically enabling two software applications to talk to each other. It's a language, it's basically. And if you look at modern infrastructure companies or banks or any industry APIs have enabled banks, in the case of financial services, to scale partnerships. Because if, for example, Federal is a great example, right? So if they're able to build a savings account API, now they are able to support 2 of the top neobanks in the country and enable them to scale these partnerships. And maybe there could be a 3rd neobank or a 4th neobank or a 5th neobank because the underlying infrastructure for that has already been built. So it's very important to understand that building this API infrastructure is a way to scale partnerships in the modern digital world that we are living in.
And in a way that the regulator is sort of kosher with as well, right? I think that's crucial here as well.
So if I just add to that, and I think Nikhil is right, the first time we met with Pramod and Nikhil was around this whole conversation on APIs. And, in the case of Federal Bank, we actually built the APIs first. At that point of time, we had no clue who would be there to kind of use the APIs. So we built a stack of APIs for account opening, for loan creation, for whatever, disbursements, etc. And then we started looking and saying, okay, now we've got to find, people who we can partner with. And obviously the journey has come a long way since then. And today we've got, 70 odd partners, 400 odd APIs, all of them there. But the API stack was a prerequisite for us to get to this stage. And I think that's helped a lot. And Nikhil and Pramod did help a lot in that.
No, lovely to hear. I think it's becoming clear that sort of the infrastructure is crucial to, I think, scale partnerships across an ecosystem. And on that topic, I want to come to you, Koshy, and talk about the oldest kind of partnership, which is the B2B partnership, right? So can you tell us a little bit about how ONDC, which is sort of the latest in the slew of digital public infrastructure, why it actually matters both to a small shop owner, in India, and why it matters to a fintech innovator. Why should they, be excited about what you're building in terms of a common network for commerce?
Okay, let me say, there's a lot of questions there, and let me just try to give you a brief answer to all of them. Why it is so relevant. See, today, when I was sitting there, I'll try to give a bit with an example. I saw a tweet coming onto my phone, which was a small finance SFAC, which is a Ministry of Agriculture enterprise. It said that this small millet producer is now on ONDC. And it gave a link. I was just curious because, of course, I'm interested in it. So I just pressed the button, and I'm these days on non-gluten food. So I said, millets, let me just, so sitting there, I could buy 2 kilos of millets from one small farmer coming through an FPO. Imagine that lady wanted to make it available in the current e-commerce ecosystem. It's practically not possible. First of all, that person will not be able to meet the requirement of the large platforms with respect to technology, processes, and everything. And if that person's product has to be seen anywhere in the 300th page, that person has to have a deep pocket. Because it's the intermediaries who is driving it. What ONDC does is to take and give the power to the endpoint. So that small farmer, FPO, Kanjipuram weaver, or anybody can now make it available because there will be small enterprises, startups who are making it possible for them to make their catalog visible in this open network, where there eventually will be 1 billion consumers available for everybody. And secondly, they can publicize without spending any money to any platform saying that I am available, click this link, which is not possible today. So imagine the kind of possibilities that I'm throwing up to the business, whether it is B2B, whether it is B2B, everybody get the equal opportunity. And what is going to drive them is what they're good at, and not whether they have a captive audience. And I'll just like to add the other part of it, is that this is where if you really look at any tech, whether it is banks, whether it's fintech, whether it's telco, who all have large digital consumers, they can now, all of us are using it. Practically everybody uses a fintech, practically everybody uses a bank. And when I go there, today they can offer only a limited set of product. Tomorrow they can say that they can find ways to practically let me buy everything. And then they will, with the kind of tech that they have, they will be able to give me personalized buying experience, not trying to push a product somebody is giving them an advertisement to. So that is a big difference. So it will finally lead to personalized buying experience by a buying application who's the buyer's agent and not the seller's agent, which is a huge change.
No, that's incredible. And most recently, we heard the news that Amazon sort of was joining the ONDC network, which finally sort of validated your claims, which you've been making from day one, that it's actually not an Amazon killer, but rather a market expansion and a growth metric. Just as UPI has, not killed cards, it has grown payments for all, right?
Absolutely. See, we always said this is an inclusive agenda. Remember when UPI started, it was supposed to be slaying something else. Because it's a lot of excitement about when somebody is fighting with somebody else. But the thing is, it is going to expand. Today, if you look at what is happening in the e-commerce, in the buying side, 5%. In the selling side, 1%. When it comes to B2B, practically insignificant. That's digital commerce. Just because we sitting here are the elite of the Indian society are all in it, doesn't mean that all of India is there. Just like 250 million transactions a month went to 7 billion transactions and 1 billion transactions a day, this is just going to balloon because it is going to drive innovation. Okay. For the buying application to find specialized, personalized way of giving the buyer an experience, and many enterprising startup to help the various small and medium enterprise like the Kanchipuram weaver I said and the miller producer I said, to find a relevance to a larger market, not just within India and internationally. Probably you would see international buying. I'll just give one quick example, which is, I want to show the power. I don't want to give the names because that's irrelevant. See, one of the large, it is just an idea, I don't even know how it's going to shape up. One of the large platforms who may not be very keen to be a party in, immediately in India. See, one of their global executives said that I'm not interested in what's happening in India, but if you guys make this large platform with all these smart products available there, probably I'll consider it as a sourcing for my global audience. Because even with no business in China, I'm sourcing 200 billion a day. I mean, 200 billion, so then I can definitely do it in.
So ONDC can actually scale exports is what you're saying, because it's sort of...
It can. Very much it can. Because what's needed, again, tell about that Kanchipuram weaver, my favorite example. She doesn't have, so long as she has an IEC code and if somebody enable her to make an order, she will be able to buy the whole documentation, export documentation, shipping, logistics, everything, by probably DHL or by Shiprocket, who already has done all these things. This is only digitally, like, Nikhil was saying, nice API calls, and they all stitch together. So what we are giving is an ability to stitch together to get seamless experience of people giving building blocks based on the specialization and their innovation.
Lovely.
I was just going to say, ONDC is also full of open APIs, so just like every other DPI.
Yeah, so, but Nikhil, I want to ask you, you've been on both sides where you've built sort of a digital public infrastructure on the early team of UPI, and also you've now become a player, as a fintech. What would you say, to a fintech founder who says, DPI is great and all, but it takes too long, yeah. I'm not going to wait for it. We never know when the regulation will come, how long the technical standards take to get published. There are teething issues at the start. I'm not sure if this is something to bet on or not. How would you, approach that problem? And would you say they should stay away from DPI or they should sort of embrace the ambiguity?
Well, not a big fan of generic yarn in the sense, it's very hard to generalize and say this because, see, one thing, okay, let me wear the founder's hat because that's what I'm most closest to. That in a founder's life, especially if you're venture capital funded, there are only fires in your life. There is morning, from the time you wake up, by the time you go to bed, you're just dousing off one fire to another. And just because those fire, you're not looking at them literally, right? Every WhatsApp message you get, every email that you get, every Slack message that you get, something is going on like this that you need to douse it off. So, look, I have a lot more empathy towards all the founders today in the sense of, like having gone through one journey and, understanding it. Having said that, in terms of, so the reason why I wanted to call this out with that there is no generic advice is because, see, the world that we are living in is kind of complex, especially in today's market when we are trying to conserve cash and survive. The first advice that anybody would give to a founder is to survive. Now, whether you want to survive holding to some DPI, whether it is through closed infrastructure, whether it is through doing some services, some solutioning, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. I think like that will take precedence because unless you can exist, unless you can float, unless you can breathe, you're not going to be able to live. So that would be the first advice. Second, in terms of, like we can only point to examples of companies that have benefited from such digital infrastructure coming up. Like we had Nitin at Zerodha who was speaking about it. For like almost like 7-8 years, nobody cared about like what they were doing, what business that they were in. They just happened to be like some JP Nagar broker guys and the Bombay gang.
Aadhaar
Like,
EKYC changed the game.
yeah, then suddenly Aadhaar EKYC came, and then, you know, e-sign came and UPI came, and therefore the trifecta happened, and suddenly Zerodha became a household name like from 2016-17 onwards. Like Harshal was here, Razorpay. They were an early upstart in Bangalore doing payment gateway. Banks were not sponsoring them, running around, etc. They were the first PG who went to enterprise merchants and said, and nobody is giving you UPI, we're going to give you UPI, right? They were the first UPI enablers on the online world. We have had companies like PhonePe, which didn't exist at all, being created. We can point to these examples, but we can't promise those successes. And that's what I would, you know, that's the caution that I would drive in to say, look, I mean, it's totally up to your context and convictions, because what made a Razorpay or a PhonePe successful is not just DPI, but the founders, the context that they were in, and all of that stuff.
No, lovely. I think that's
Said that, I think clearly DPI is obviously been a base on which most of this has grown. Yeah, so it's like necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah, exactly. It's necessary and not sufficient.
a neat summary, ma'am. But I think if you can also point to whether you think DPI actually helps inter-sectoral or inter-regulatory issues. Because as we know, Account Aggregator, for example, cuts across securities, banking, pensions, and IRDI insurance, which are 4 sectors which normally have completely sort of different regulatory rules. So can it sort of play that role? Has it helped across sectors?
Yeah, I think you've given the example yourself, Kamya. So Account Aggregator is obviously started with banks, but it can't be full scale and complete till it gets IRDAI, SEBI, PFRDA, etc. on the bandwagon. So clearly DPI is built in a form which is sector agnostic and geography agnostic, etc. So all good examples. BBPs is another good example. Any kind of biller can come onto that system, so it becomes a thing. So I think, yes, the answer to the question is DPI is intended to be sector agnostic, geography agnostic, and will built that way. Will it happen overnight? No, even Account Aggregator has its growth pangs. Will take time before all of this comes, because there's also, you know, the cleanliness of the data, the kind of data that has to come through, etc. But clearly that's the way forward, and I think, you know, I think the minister articulated it well enough, RBI, ED. So we do believe that that's the way forward, and therefore it's best for banks like us to be on that bandwagon early enough so that we can take full benefit of it.
I just want to add to this. You know, one is looking at this from a regulatory perspective around and so on. But it's also kind of important to put it in the context of the second order, third order effects some of the baseline DPIs are having on other industries. Like if you take example of ONDC, for example, you know, like this connection, just so bear with me, right? So you can get a GST number in India today only if you have a PAN number. Okay, so from your PAN number, you get a GST number. And once you get your GST number, that's probably useful to sign up onto a platform like ONDC. Then you get returns and so on and so forth. And then you use something like UPI to collect payments, right? So there is this one, you know, where the same digital public good, which happened to be in the realm of identity and financial services, is now enabling a new sector called e-commerce. Take healthcare, for example. You know, the government has started something called the National Health Mission, which, you know, which enables everybody to get a health ID and so on. So like, or all of you got your COVID vaccination, right? So how did COVID vaccination happen? How did the government know that you're not getting 3 vaccinations or 4 vaccinations? It's because they used Aadhaar to deduplicate and then gave you a health ID, and on top of this health ID, you got vaccination, right? So if you look at the kind of second order, third order effects that it's set off, like there is something that the government is working on, skill credentials. There is something for MSMEs called an identity program called Udyam, which is again built on top of Aadhaar. DigiLocker, and many of you would have used DigiYatra if you've traveled to, you know, to Bombay today. built again on top of, this thing, and which is kind of changing the way we travel. So one is to look at it from a regulatory perspective on what changes, but the other side also to see is from a consumer's perspective or a user's perspective. You are actually seeing the same baseline infra have second order, third order effects on segments that you wouldn't have imagined at all. And that's one of the fascinating things that's happening right in front of us.
Lovely. So last question, I think, Koshy, I'll come to you. You've seen now all of the blocks come to life and you're building the final block. So if you can share with us kind of your estimation of the kind of impact that this will actually have on India's, let's say, economic growth when you have to combine everything. And assuming, ONDC scales, just in a year or so, I think we'll hit scale. so just let us know, how much you think this is actually going to change the game for India in a combinatorial manner.
No, so that's a very easy question because I can talk very, very future ahead, and it's not going, that future is, say in our world, when you say very future, it's not decades, it's just years. So what I expect is that in a few years' time, every product owner, it could be a physical product or it could be a service, which can be expressed in a catalog. That means many people would be wanting to buy it. It's not a bespoke kind of solution. Will make the catalog visible in this open network of open ONDC. What does it mean? It's like everybody having a web page. Everybody will have their digital catalog present. Then you will have specialized buying application who, based on the kind of clientele they are dealing with, it could be elite customers, it could be mid-segment, it could be village, so, people from the villages, rural economy, anywhere. There'll be different specialized buying applications which will help their clients to source what is good for them, not what is pushed by somebody else, which I think is going to be a fundamental shift in the way commerce is running. So if I use one of the comments which created a little controversy is that e-commerce as we see today will cease to become relevant. And it is going to completely change. It is just going to become one more tool, one more channel for the product owner.
Lovely. So we've gone from eKYC as a base building block to sci-fi future of complete alteration of e-commerce.
I just want to add one last point to, like Koshy was saying, that we were talking about this the idea of DPIs, right? So, like, I spoke about GST as a DPI, as an example. Imagine if GST didn't exist, ONDC can't fly. Because the amount of complexity that used to exist, there were 1,800 tax classes that a small business had to take care of if you were to sell all across India, which is now reduced to 4 or 5 tax classes, right? So while the law and the compliance has been solved for, that is now enabling something like ONDC to come to life. So if this didn't exist, imagine ONDC would have probably had to build some tax simplification, blah, 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 etc., everything else to actually make this to life. The reason why all of this is in the realm of, possibility that it can happen is because they're all interplaying very well with each other, leading one, the first order effect, having second order effects and third order effects. And that's where the innovation is pushed on to these second, third order effects. And that's the crux of all things DPI.
Awesome. I'd like to close by asking each of you to share one quick 10-second closing remark of what should a fintech operator know about DPI and how they should look at DPI. Just your last thoughts.
Okay, I'll go first. I think any fintech owner should obviously know what DPI is in terms of thing and use it. And I think build use cases on it is what I've said. And it's not just fintech founder. Banks like us are building use cases on it. Enough occasions where we have gone to RBIH, Rajesh Bansal and his team, to Dilip Asbe and the NPCI team, saying we have this particular use case. Can we build it on UPI? Can we build it on something else? And they've been very forthcoming in it. So I think one is understanding the power of it, and two is innovating with use cases and working with the regulatory agencies to get them done. And not just for fintech founders, for banks like us also.
Lovely, lovely. Nikhil?
I think a lot of people get it but don't get it. you know. And the best way to solve for this is just look around you. Look around you, look at your own life, and go back to like, what are the ABCD things that has changed in your life in the last 5 years? And I can bet that one of these DPIs have had an impact. If you are able to open a mutual fund sitting here as we speak, then there is some DPI effect. If you are able to send money to someone at home, then there is a DPI in effect. If you are able to file your taxes before and get your income tax refunds on time, there is a DPI in effect. So the best way to understand this is, because we are all the users of this. We keep talking like it's made for someone who's, you know, and somebody else will innovate. The first thing is we are actually all users and consumers of this. So the best way to look at this is to look at your own life and then understand it at that level, and then see how can it be useful for your business.
Yeah, no, very true. We should look to ourselves first. Koshy, you have the last word today.
Let me see whether I can say it in 10 seconds. I said, what DPI and what all this enables is to innovate and specialize in what you're good at. If you can do a good job of it, these DPIs, all like you said, all of them come together, will help you to stitch together solutions which will become a meaningful business opportunity for you, as well as a fantastic offering for the end consumer.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.